But if you have a religious conviction against abortion, it doesn't matter. So here is what Judge Alito, Roberts, and Thomas issued yesterday. Listen to this. This case points to a much larger issue, the future of freedom for all Americans to live according to their faith and conscience at the workplace. Facilitated referrals are an existing, recognized, workable, and already implemented alternative that the state regularly permits for a host of non-religious reasons, and a nationally respected pharmacy associations and the majority of states fully support the use of that alternative for religious reasons. The state has agreed that the Stormins referrals case causes no harm. The Ninth Circuit decision against Stormins and the two pharmacists upset decades of settled pharmacy practice. Now that the Supreme Court has taken a powder on religious liberty, how many of the other 49 states will start passing similar laws to drive faithful Christians out of the pharmacy business? There is an attack on religious freedom for the things that the left finds valuable. And I warn the left, it's a pendulum, and it's going to swing the other way, and you do not want it to swing as far or farther the other way. I told you, and I don't want to violate any confidence. He was very, very gracious to me yesterday. I had lunch with Jeffrey Katzenberg, and I wasn't going to say anything, but he wanted to have it in the middle of the floor of the Palm restaurant. So I guess he doesn't mind having lunch with me yesterday. So we were talking, and he was very gracious, very smart. Walked up to him. The first thing he said to me is he walked in. I was already there, and he walked in, and he said, "Where's Tanya?" And I thought, wow, does this guy have a good staff? Where's Tanya? She's not coming with? We sat down. We talked a little bit of politics, and we're at complete opposite ends of the spectrum. Complete opposite ends of the spectrum. And he said, boy, are we in trouble. And he said, but this is, I guess, the trouble that you saw 5 or 6 years ago. I didn't see it coming.
What?
And yeah.
Really?
He was very gracious and he's really smart.
He's actually
really
happened.
smart.
You didn't dream it. That is something else.
No.
Because when I was talking to Spielberg 2 days ago.
Shut up. So, and I hope I'm not violating any confidence. I mean, he's not a fan of my politics. He's not.
Not.
Yeah, I don't want to create any false illusion that, he's a fan. He's not. But he did say, this has kind of taken me by surprise, this, what's happening in Europe and everything else. And he disagrees with the reason why it's happening. But it was interesting because at one point, he knew that I am a guy who can't vote for Donald Trump. And he didn't say this, but basically he's like, is there anything I could do to talk you into Hillary Clinton? And I'm like, no.
No.
And he's a big fundraiser for Hillary Clinton and everything else.
The biggest. He's the biggest bundler for Hillary in the country.
Yeah.
Country.
But in the country. But I spoke to him yesterday about, the pendulum. The pendulum, this is why you just can't swing this pendulum so far. And I warn, please, progressives, you think you're going to be on the winning end of this stick, but revolutions usually are not won. The people who are standing and in charge are not the people who started it. And I don't know which one. I mean, Theodore Roosevelt started it, but Woodrow Wilson was the one who really kicked it in. So I don't know who thinks they have the upper hand here. But you don't want somebody to grab the pendulum, because most likely, as George Washington wrote in his founding address, or in his farewell address, there's going to come a time when the parties are so disenfranchised from each other, so disenfranchised the people, that it becomes vengeance politics. Well, that's where we're at. It's vengeance politics. And that's when somebody who doesn't care about any of it steps in and grabs control. That was his warning. Well, that's where we're at. That's exactly where we're at.
And the principles that we've talked about for a long time, they're not really principles that a lot of people seem to be holding anymore. And especially when you go to younger generations, we're talking about a lot of people will say, well, the Second Amendment, that's an outdated amendment. What does that mean? Okay, and that's been a long-term argument. What about the First Amendment, though? Is the First Amendment an outdated amendment that we should no longer consider? They asked this question to college students last year. 21% of college students said that it was an outdated amendment that can no longer be applied in today's society. And it was 30% of liberal college students that believe that. I mean, that's a third of liberal college students, basically, that believe that. And then you add...
that's the case because they demand their safe zone.
And yeah.
They want a place where they don't have to hear anything from anybody else that they don't want to hear.
Yeah, and they went into that a little bit. From what you know, when it comes to freedom of speech, does the First Amendment make an exception for hate speech? In other words, is hate speech not protected under the First Amendment? 35% of college students believe that hate speech is not protected speech. Now again, nobody likes hate speech, but again, who's defining the hate speech? And of course, we all know that it is, of course, protected. It's the reason why the First Amendment exists, right? I mean,
love speech doesn't need to be protected.
Right, everyone likes it.
Look, there's a lot of people that will say that the left engages in hate speech just on conservatives. I mean, look at conservatives. Mm-hmm. It is, you could make the case that's hate speech. You're demonizing us. You're making us into villains. It's absolute hate speech. The same thing is said on the right, on the left. The left looks at what we're saying and they say this is hate speech. Only one side is going to win. Are you that comfortable that you're on the winning side for all time? Are you that comfortable? Because I'm not. I don't believe in any of this. But B, even if I were on the progressive side, I would not be convinced that some populist couldn't stand up and say, you know what? Revolt, unite. And then who gets the hate speech criminal penalties?
This is why it's so broad. I mean, it covers everything for the most part. I mean, pretty much everything, free speech. And that was another question they asked. What do you believe the First Amendment should do? I support freedom of speech in all cases, even though hate speech is harmful and hurtful, it is protected under the First Amendment. Only 42% of college students agreed with that statement. 42%. 46% said freedom of speech is important, but there are exceptions. Hate speech should not be protected. And then another 10% said, they went even further and said that colleges, universities, and government should regulate free speech more.
Oh my gosh.
I mean, if you look at that as you combine those, it's 42% saying, I believe in the First Amendment as it is now. 56% say government should crack down on speech more.
We've lost this generation.
Oh, well, we've got a federal judge saying that he sees absolutely no value in studying the U.S. Constitution. Yeah. So, I mean, doomed we are. Doomed we are.
No, we're not. If we
that is.
It was a long pause.
Yeah, because I'm just trying to think in my own life what this means. If we retool, if we forget, the battle is lost under 55, and over probably 18. Anybody 2 to 18 is where the battleground needs to be played. And we